So I'd like to invite the presenters to come up and join us up front here, and invite those in the audience who might have some questions for our presenters to please approach the microphones, and if you will, following with the conventions of earlier, identify yourself before you present your question. So please go ahead.
Thanks. Joanna Bryson. I'm terrible with names. I'm going to ask a question for the last person, although it's relevant to some of the earlier talks too. You mentioned the problem with NIH that's taking increasingly long for assistant professors to become, or postdocs to become assistant professors, and NIH people to get their first grant. And you attributed that to the complexity of being trained to be a scientist. But normally, most people are attributing this to the reduced amount of investment per investigator, so the expansion of the numbers, the raw expansion of the numbers. So the way this becomes involving the other people as well. So first of all, I wanted you to defend your unusual interpretation of the data. But secondly, if it is a problem about this just sheer scale, just the number of people who are well-trained are now competing, that reminds me of the problem with crowdsourcing information that doesn't create structure. We're very good now at having springs and tearing things down and identifying problems and protesting against them. But is there any evidence that we're good at creating new structures and actually coming up with replacement structures?
So I guess I should start by just saying that I didn't mean to imply that was the only problem. And I think actually in that same NIH article, part of what it talks about is some of the problems that we do have in terms of training more and more scientists and not necessarily having the positions to support them as they move up the ladder. So I think that's a very, very important problem. I don't mean to downplay that in any sense. I think part of it is, though, that we do have more knowledge to make sense of, and some of the biggest discoveries have been made by taking ideas from one field and transferring them to the other. So how can we make that process more possible when it takes so long to just learn one of those areas? So I guess I should say that both of those, I think, are very important.
Hi, my name is Ian Miller. I'm from the University of Toronto. I've got two quick questions. So for Emily, does looking at your own profile page, does that bear any similarity to the self-affirmation, and does it activate any of the same regions? And a quick other question for Betsy, is link rot analogous to transactive forgetting, and does the metaphor still apply? So, or like when links die. So, but first question about the profile.
So there is a paper that Catalina Toma wrote about comparing interacting with your Facebook profile to self-affirmation effects. And she shows some similarity in effects there in terms of certain kinds of activities that people engage in being affirming. But I think there's also a number of papers that suggest that depending on how you engage with different kinds of social media, you can get positive or negative effects. In terms of the neural side of that, people haven't specifically looked at it in the context of affirmation, but other groups have looked at things like getting positive social feedback, so likes, being positive social reinforcement that are reflected in reward systems in the brain, similar to other kinds of rewards like chocolate or other social positive feedback. And we have a little bit of data where we've looked at randomly assigning people to either get exposed to pictures of their friends that we download with their permission from their Facebook profiles, or control faces. And I think those effects are a little bit less clear. So I think this is a very early pass at some of those kinds of questions. But at least in the psych literature, I think some of your intuitions are starting to be supported.
Yeah, and the other question was about links that die. You think like a YouTube video is taken offline, you expect it to be there, you go back thinking it'll be there, and it's gone. So is that in any way analogous to transactive forgetting, or the reverse of memory, basically?
Transactive forgetting. Well, I haven't actually, all I would be doing was speculating, because I haven't actually worked that far into it. I think that, obviously YouTube videos are great because they use our visual system, right? So like all the things that we try to look at, in print, can be hard to kind of visualize like how to do something, whereas you just go on a YouTube video and it's like, oh, that's how you do a French braid, that kind of thing. And so, there's definitely overlap, right? So like even if you can't find that particular video, right? Like all of the internet is set up so that there's all kinds of other links, right? That are usually related, so that you can just find, well, let me look at this other person's way of doing a French braid. So I think that's kind of the wormhole we go down, right? You can kind of go on to look at one thing, and then you kind of keep going down. And one thing that I'd like to investigate in the future, this is a little bit of a segue off your question, but the thing about transactive memory networks is that we're all kind of an expert, or maybe not everybody, but most people are kind of an expert in something. And I do think those memory results would be different if you were testing their own expertise, right? So if there were psychology facts that I was looking at, I would remember those because I know that people come to me and ask me these kinds of questions, right? So that wouldn't be something that I would forget. These were all like, trivia statements that are, only certain types of people like to remember trivia. So I think that looking at that, and then also looking at the different situations where going online would not be beneficial because there's an emergency situation on an oil rig or something like that, and so you need to get muscle memory and kind of go through like the whole kind of fire drill type of thing. It's not something you'd want to leave to like, all right, let me look up the steps online. So it's a really kind of complicated process that we've stripped it down, because you have to in order to kind of take away those confounding variables. But now we can start to add in those kind of complex layers and look at things like, forgetting, or like what if something's not there. But I think for the most part, the internet is just so efficiently organized that it does really, it is like a web in the sense that it does give us other alternatives, for looking those things up. If you can't find how to fix your Mac on, the Mac community, somebody else may have fixed it in Yahoo Answers or something, right? So.
Hiroki Sayama from SUNY Binghamton and the Northeastern University. Thank you very much for the great talk. My question is whether or not the people actually changed the way they maintain the transaction memory before and after the internet. So before the internet, you need to know where to seek the right information. But nowadays, you don't really have to know it. You just type the question to Google. So because there's only one source, so maybe Wikipedia for students. Right. So instead, I think that it is getting more important to know what is the right expression to type in, because search is pretty much based on the keyword matching. So I was wondering if there's any research in terms of how people.
Well, I know Daniel Russell does research on that. So he does research. He works at Google, and he does research looking at how well people search and helping them to become better searchers. So what he finds is that almost everyone thinks they're a better searcher than they are, but that he can, you can train yourself to become a better one. So he actually does these things called Google of the Day. Where he puts these things up, and you have to figure out where the statue is located and all that kind of thing. And so you have to, kind of follow a series of steps in searching. And so, what he finds is there's a kind of a long tail, right, of kind of people who do, really superficial internet searches. And you can see that if any of you guys who are teachers, you can see that in your students, right, where they're all kind of look up the same thing, and you can kind of just type in the 2 or 3 sentences and find those plagiarized sections in their papers and whatnot. Whereas other people are kind of better able to find, go into the deep internet, right, and kind of, it's a different skill to type something into a Google search bar than it is to go, say, into PsycInfo or something and find kind of a, here are the people who have cited this paper and that kind of thing, which we all kind of know how to do, but you have to teach students how to do because they don't quite have that level of. So it's all, but again, that's still a transactive memory system, right? It's still kind of showing, and it's something that people, can go back to, to go to somebody who is a good searcher, right? So for example, I don't know how I became this, but I became kind of the medical person. I mean, I have a PhD, I'm not an MD, but for some reason, everyone in my life comes to me for medical searches. Now, they could do it themselves, but they know that I would be able to find kind of really good research studies on like whether or not they should do this kind of chemotherapy or something like that. And so even with that, even with searching, I think people know who to go to for, for good searches.
Linda, do you have any thoughts on that? I'm curious, do you think transactive memory systems will change if people have other ways to find information? Was it just that the roles will change, that they're remembering? I don't know, I don't ask Betsy about what chemotherapy, but I ask Betsy to search for the chemotherapy. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and whether my first instinct would be that it's a different node, but whether it changes the whole way we remember, or whether it makes us less likely to forget because the knowledge is out there, although we have an example where the links might go down and it's harder to. So, interesting question.
I think that there's also, just to add to that, there's an interesting paper by Bryn Evans and Ed Chi that have looked at this interaction between your kind of social capital or your social network and your searching, and showing that people often go to your social network to help with searching, just like you're talking about, in a variety of different ways. And so, yeah, I think there's this really interesting interplay between the offline social network and the kind of online transactive network that you have access to.
All right. Well, I'm sorry to shut it down. I know we could go on some of these topics for a while, but I'm noticing our time. So I'd like you to join me in thanking our presenters for today.